Napoleon, like anyone can even know that.
So today I have a very quick and simple tutorial to help us set up a very rudimentary virtualized Active Directory domain that we can use moving ahead for red teaming exercises. Now, truth be told, I'm personally more of a fan of kind of like defensive cybersecurity, especially things around in the realm of active defense and threat hunting. But I'm a firm believer that in order to become great at defense, you have to understand offense. And so going ahead on this channel, we'll be performing a lot of the attacks and red teaming ourselves so that we can then go and, for example, do a threat hunt or do detection engineering based on the actual attack that we did ourselves. So I guess in a sense, we'll be learning by emulating some form of a purple team approach. All this to say, I wanted to create this one simple reference video so that I can point to it in future red team videos so that anyone can come and know how to set up a very simple basic virtualized Active Directory setup to attack. So if you're interested in following along in the future, either just by doing the red teaming or by doing the red teaming and then following up with some blue team exercises, I highly recommend that you follow along today and just learn how to set this up so that next time when I release videos on red teaming, you'll already have this setup ready to go. And of course, you don't just have to use what we're going to create today for my courses. You can use it for exploring and learning by yourself, which I highly recommend. In any case, methinks that's enough dilly-dallying for now. Let's get to it. Okay friends, and so for this tutorial, you'll be needing three things. The first thing you're going to need is a hypervisor. Now there are many different kinds out there, and the point of this video is not to do an overview of all of them, but myself, I prefer a VMware Workstation. Now the thing is, VMware Workstation does require a license. I think it's about $200. It's quite expensive, but it is a perpetual license, meaning you buy it once and then you're pretty much set for life. And here's the thing. If you are committed to cybersecurity as a path, I really recommend this is a $200 you save or find somewhere and invest in this. Because the truth is, while there are pretty good alternatives available, VMware Player and VirtualBox, being the foremost among them, I've used all of them and I've just always found that VMware Workstation is more stable. There's less issues I run into. Right, so I don't want to sound like a VMware shill here because it's just a giant megalithic corporation and they just laid off a bunch of people as well, so, boo on them. Right, so that's all I'll say on the matter. But obviously, in order for us to proceed, you will have to have some form of a hypervisor. Right. The other two things we'll need are ISO files, which are, of course, you can think of as digital disks. Specifically for this tutorial, I'll be using Windows Server 22. That's going to be our domain controller. And I'll be using Windows 11 Enterprise, and that will basically be our workstation. Now, of course, we're going to use evaluation versions of these, both of which are free. They're very easy to find just by Googling them, but you'll see if you Google them, you're basically going to go to a Microsoft page, which is a little bit irritating because they ask you to register first. Now, there's no issue here. You register, they don't bug you with emails or anything like that. It's just a tiny bit of kind of like activation energy. I guess it takes about 10 seconds to do so. However, there is a page on the Microsoft website where you can go and find links for all the ISOs kind of like neatly together. And I'm going to leave that link right at the top of the description. So you can go there and download the Windows 22 Server evaluation, as well as the Windows 11 Enterprise evaluation. Great, so now at this point I'm going to assume that you have a hypervisor and you've downloaded the two ISO files and we can proceed. Now guys, I'm going to be showing the instructions for how to install it on VMware Workstation. Obviously, if you're using something else, Parallels or VirtualBox or VMware Player, you're going to have to figure out how to adapt these instructions to your specific case. But really, it's almost always very simple and logical to figure this out. And if it's not, then learn how to use Google and ChatGPT very well, not just for today, for your cyber career in general. All right, so first thing, let's just go ahead and install our Windows 22 server. So I'm just gonna go to File, New Virtual Machine. Typical. We always want to select that there. Next. You can see I've already have Windows Server 2022 selected. Next. I'm just going to be calling this DC01 for domain controller. And 60 gig is fine. Next. So here, customize hardware. There's 3 things we want to change here. Now obviously this depends on whether or not your base host system has enough resources. I really recommend you bump this up to 8 gigabytes, and if you can't, then at least do 4, but I'm gonna go for 8. For processors, again, depending on what you have to work with, we really want this to be at least 2, but I'm gonna bump that up to 4. And then finally here for the CD drive, now we're gonna select our ISO. We can click there, we can click browse, and we can see right there is my Windows Server 22, so we can open that. I'm gonna close, hit finish, and we can see it kind of appears right here, and let's just click on this power on this virtual machine. Okay, so once we get to here to kind of the setup screen, I just like to click view, stretch guess, keep aspect ratio stretch. Just gonna make this easier to read, obviously. So we can hit next, install now. And here we're gonna choose the standard evaluation, and I'm gonna choose the desktop experience, which just means it has a GUI. Now, if you wanna do like kick it old school and be a elite hacker, obviously you can install it without the GUI, but I have enough system resources and I like having the ability to choose either for any specific task. So that's what I'm gonna go with. I recommend you do the same if you can. And we can sign our soul over to the devil. Jokes, obviously. The devil's bad, kids. And we can, sorry, just feel my inner John Strand coming out there. This won't take too long, guys, but I'll fast forward it in any case. Alright, and the setup is not quite done. We're gonna reboot, and we're still going to have to basically, I would say, finalize the setup in a second phase right now. So here we can see it's already chosen administrator. Now guys, I'm gonna choose the same password for everything because obviously we aren't trying to set up a real secure environment here. We're actually trying to set up something kind of insecure, and also just to make it very easy for myself so I never have to think and waste time or refer to notes or whatever. I'm gonna say password, capital P with an exclamation mark, as you can see right there. Now you are free to choose whatever password you want. Just be aware that we're gonna have to select multiple passwords, and again, just think about what's easiest for you to manage and the fact that this isn't really about creating a secure environment, actually the opposite. So we can hit finish, and now we can log in. Right. So we'll write our password, and we can say yes. And we'll get to all of this soon enough. There's just one thing I want to do before we actually commence with the installation, which is I want to install VMware Tools, which is going to allow 2 things. You can see right now I've basically got a 4:3 aspect ratio here on the virtual environment, while my screen is 16:9. Well, to me it would be nice if this adapted to the actual resolution of my screen, so I want that. And the second thing is it's going to allow us to copy and paste in between our desktop, our host system, and this virtual system, which can come in handy, especially once we start working with longer PowerShell commands and stuff like that. So very simple. We just hit VM, install VMware Tools. I'm just going to close that. Now basically Windows thinks that I've put a disk in, you can see there in D, so I can just double click on setup. And we can see there's our setup. Very easy, we just hit basically next, all the standard stuff. It's very quick to install, and then it's going to ask us to restart. We can see we're done. I hit finish, say yes to restart. And we can see actually that it hasn't adapted to our resolution yet, and that's to be expected. Just go to view, stretch guessed, keep aspect ratio, and now we can see that it did. So once again, I'm gonna hit it there. We can see obviously one strange thing now that's happened is that everything is incredibly small kind of in the UI. And so there's an easy fix for this as well. We'll just right click here, display settings, second from the bottom. And then here we can see the scale is 100%. Let's just bump that up to 300%. And now we are good. All right, guys, so I have obviously not set this up as the domain controller yet. We'll get there soon. For now, I'm actually just going to suspend this machine by using the pause button right there. The reason is we're going to install our workstation, our Windows 11 evaluation first, and then we'll continue with that. Right. So same deal as before. We're gonna pretty much follow the same steps. They'll be slightly different. We're gonna go File, New Virtual Machine. All this stays the same. Here obviously we'll change to Windows 11 and 64-bit. And I'm just gonna call this Station 01. So because it's Windows 11, it basically forces us to use a virtual TPM. You don't have to worry about this too much. Just write any password there. I'm going to do the exact same and the exact same advice as before. If you can, bump it up to 8 and 4, and if you can't, then work with what you have. Use an ISO file browse. This time obviously we'll select our Windows 11, open, close, finish. It'll appear here in a second. Here we can see, so we can start it up. Alright, so the setup here is largely the same. Once again, custom. And I'll fast forward this bit again. Once it's done, it's basically going to restart and we'll enter again kind of what you can think of as the second phase of the setup. All right, so here, let's choose sign in options. And we'll say domain join instead. And then right here, we'll enter our name. We'll call ourselves Caster Troy. You can call yourself anything you want. Password. Again, I'll be using the same password throughout. Here, again, since this is a burner, we don't really care about this, so just select any gobbledygook. And there we go. And now we want to turn off all these kind of back-end communication things. Just minimizes noise on the back end and also frees up system resources. Okay, and as you can see, we're basically in, and I want to do the exact same thing. I'm going to install VMware Tools again. You don't have to sit through this one again, so I'm just going to skip right until the end. Alright guys, so VMware Tools installed successfully. I restarted the computer, I adjusted the resolution, the scaling as before. And so everything in here is ready to set up as well. But for now, we're going to go and also suspend this machine because I'm going to move back to the server, and we're going to start by setting up our domain controller. So let's do it. So as you can see, I'm back here in my Windows 22 server. So the first thing we want to do is set our IP statically. The reason we want to do this is, things are usually configured so that we automatically get an IP from our DHCP. The issue with that is that lease can expire and the DHCP can lease a new IP to us, meaning our IP, we can just wake up one day and our IP has changed. And if that happens, your network is kind of going to break because the other stations are going to look to communicate with the domain controller, and because the IP changed, they won't be able to do so anymore. So whether you set this up for home simulations or whether you are actually setting up an Active Directory environment to be used in production, this is something you'll always want to do. I also want to mention briefly, there's two ways of doing this. There is kind of the quick, hacky, lazy man's way, which is by using the GUI. It's probably simpler, but it doesn't scale at all. And then the other way is, of course, by using PowerShell, which I guess for a beginner seems a little bit more complicated. However, it scales very well, right? So obviously the thing is today, we don't have to scale anything. We're working with two simple VMs here. So today I am going to follow the lazy man's way, just so you know how to do this. And then the next time when I set up a more complicated Active Directory environment for raid team exercises, I'll show you how to do this in PowerShell as well. For now, if you're curious, you could literally just ask ChatGPT for the command, and it's very good at giving it to you. And then there's one more thing that we actually need to know before we can go assign the private IP. And that thing is, what can our IP be? Right? So what we really want to do is we want to assign an IP that is on the same subnet than what we are right now. So I'm going to write here PowerShell. We can open PowerShell, and then I'm going to run ipconfig all. And we can see right here that we are basically on the 192.168.230 subnet, right? Now here's the thing, as a rough, short approximation, typically, most systems reserved 100 to 200 of this number there, between 100 and 200, is reserved for DHCP lease. In other words, we do not want to use an IP there because it could create a conflict in the future. So typically what you want to do is choose something between, let's say, 50 to 100 or 200 to 250. Again, this is kind of like a very crude approximation. We can actually go into VMware, into the settings and see exactly which IPs we're allowed to use. But for now, I'm telling you as a rule of thumb, 98% of the time this is going to work for you. So in other words, we're going to choose 192.168.230, and then the last number we'll choose something over 200. For now, I'm just going to say let's choose 210, right? The other thing we do want to pay attention here is just what our default gateway is. And, you know, not too surprisingly, it's either 1 or 2. In this case, it's 2, right? So now to set it statically with the GUI, just right click there, say open network and internet settings. And then here we can click on Ethernet. We can click here and say change adapter options, and then double click this. And then finally we can hit properties over there. We want to change statically assign our IPv4. So you can see it right there, double click this. And we can see right now it's set to automatically. So let's just change that. And as I said, it's 192.168.230 and 210 is what we've decided. It automatically filled that in, and that's obviously correct. And then as we saw in our ipconfig command, this is 230.2. We'll leave the rest the same. We say okay, okay, and we can close. And let's just head back to PowerShell real quick, and let's run that same command. And you can see that indeed our IPv4 address is now 230.210. All right, so the next thing we want to do is we want to set this system up to actually be a domain controller. Right now, it isn't aware that our intention is to use it as a domain controller. We have to tell it that. So whenever you have a Windows Server, you'll have this icon called the Server Manager, and this is something you'll be using a lot. So for now, we're going to click Configure this local server, and I just quickly want to change the name actually before we go ahead and actually install the Active Directory services. So I'm just going to say DC1. We'll hit apply, and this is actually going to restart. After the restart, I'll meet you back here. All right, friends, so you can see we've restarted successfully, whatever that means. And now we can continue with setting this up to be a domain controller. Next, we'll click Add Roles and Features. Let's just make that visible. We'll hit Next. Next. Make sure that's selected. Next. Everything here default. You can see we've selected the right one, so we'll hit Next again. And here we want to select Active Directory Domain Services. All this is correct. You can just say Add Features. Then we'll say Next. This you will leave standard as well. We'll say Next again. We'll hit Next again. And now we'll hit Install. All right, guys, so you can see it's finished installing. Right now, we actually want to click on this, promote this server to a domain controller. So click that, but I'm going to actually show, in case you missed that, which happens often because people just see installation done and they hit close, another way to get there. And that we can see right here, notifications. It's got a little exclamation mark. So click that, and we can see it basically gives us the exact same option, promote the server to a domain controller. Let's click that. Here we're going to select add a new forest. And our root domain name, well, this again is something totally up to you. You can think of this as the name of your Active Directory domain. I'm just going to call it getgood.com because that's a word and term that I like using. But again, choose something simple. You can add .com. You don't need to either. It's just kind of a convention. So we hit next. We'll need to specify a password here for the DSRM. Hit next. This will just take a short while, but we'll hit next again. So we can see it basically selected Get Good. Yours will be based on what you chose for your Active Directory. This is all good. Next. This is all good. Next. Right, so, everything is pretty much good. We don't get any RAID cross warnings that won't allow us to continue, so you can see the install button is active. I'm going to hit install. This will take a short while. It'll reboot once again, and I'll meet you here once this is complete. Alright friends, and so the system has rebooted, and now what we'd like to do is add some Active Directory users. And so for this very basic setup, we're going to create 2 domain admins and 2 domain users. So not a lot at all. Now there are a lot of automated scripts we can run that will kind of like draw from a dictionary and, create 1,000 users or 1,000 domain admins, etc. And certainly we'll be using that in the future when I get to more intermediate or advanced Active Directory setups. But for the purpose of this kind of very simple one, I actually also want to go through how to do so manually. All right. And so the first thing is let's click on Start. We'll go to Windows Administrative Tools. And right there, you'll see we have Active Directory Users and Computers. So let's click on that. You can see here is the forest we created, gitgood.com. So let's open it up. And we can see there we have users, right? So right now, these are kind of like all the standard users that Active Directory just creates per default when you install it. So let's add a few users of our own. So the first thing I'm going to do is just create a domain user. And we can do that by right-clicking. And I'll say new. And I'll say user. All right, so obviously you can name this whatever you want. My domain users today will be a shout out to one of my favorite movies, Reservoir Dogs. So we're going to call our first character Mr. Pink in honor of Steve Buscemi. In honor of Steve Buscemi's character? I think that's how you pronounce it, Buscemi? Buscemi? Anyway, what a great actor. And then once again, guys, I'm going to do the same as always. Same password. I recommend you do the same. Let's deselect that. And let's actually select that. Now again, these are like if you were going to do this in actuality. This is the opposite of what you want to do. But we're just simplifying things, making life easier for ourselves. And again, this is intentionally a vulnerable setup, right? So we can go next. We can see everything is good there. And we can click finish. And we can see Mr. Pink right there. Now I just want to show you real quick. I can right click on it, go to properties. We can go to member of up here. And we can see that indeed Mr. Pink is a domain user. Now, if Mr. Pink was a domain admin, we would also see domain admin here. And we'll do that shortly enough, right? So I'm going to click OK. And I'm going to create another user. And this time it's a little bit easier because we can just right click and we can say copy. And we can say Mr. Brown, which is Quentin Tarantino's character in Reservoir Dogs. And same deal, same password. And these settings are good already, so I can say next and finished. Okay, awesome. So now we're going to create our 2 domain admins. And the process is pretty much the exact same. So we'll start by saying right click, new user. This time I will call my domain admins in honor of some badass female heroines. So first we'll have Ellen Ripley. Probably know who that is. Ripley. And then here we'll say password, exclamation mark. I just realized I could have actually just copied the other one again. Anyway, we fixed that, change those things up, next, finished. Okay, so now Ellen Ripley is a domain user. So how do we turn her into a domain admin? Well, I kind of already showed you guys how to do that. We go to properties, member of, she's only domain user, so we will add. And here we can write domain admins. We'll check names. They kind of corrected us. We can say okay, and we can hit apply, and that's it, guys. Ellen Ripley is now a domain admin. So I can hit OK, and I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to copy her, and this one goes out to my all-time favorite, Sarah Connor. Sarah Connor. That's my brilliant Arnold Schwarzenegger impersonation. I know it must be very impressive. Same deal with the password. And this is already correct. Finished. Alright guys, and that is literally it. We have 2 domain users, Mr. Pink and Mr. Brown, and we have 2 domain admins, Ellen Ripley and Sarah Connor. And that's it for now. So right before we continue and set up our workstation and connect it to our domain controller, there's 3 more things I want to do real quick, which is disable the firewall, disable Defender, as well as change the settings so the computer never sleeps, right? The reason I want to do this is simply because sometimes when you don't attend to the system and it logs out by itself and you have to constantly log in, well, it's kind of irritating, right? So I'll just say never there, and that's good. Now the computer's never going to log out by itself, right? Next here, I'll just type firewall, and we can click here on Windows Defender Firewall. We can see here we can turn it on or off, click on that. And then for all 3, just deactivate them and hit OK. And that's good. And now one final thing, just write virus. And we can see here virus and threat protection. You can click on that. And we'll scroll down and we can see here manage settings. Click on that. And now there's 3 toggles. We'll turn all 3 of them off. Yeah, and that's it, guys. So our domain controller is now set up. But don't turn it off or suspend it. We want to keep it active because we want to connect our workstation now to it. And so it has to be online, obviously, for that to happen. And so for now, we can just switch over to our workstation. All right, friends, so we're back here in the workstation. As was the case with the domain controller, the first thing we want to do is just statically set the IP. So it's a little bit different in Windows 11, but you're going to recognize a lot of the settings. We're going to right click here. We're going to say network and internet settings again. And then we'll click on Ethernet. And we can see it looks a little bit different. And here we can see IP assignment and DNS is automatic. So let's hit edit. Let's change this to manual. And we only have to do IPv4. And so if you guys remember, before we had the 192.168.230 subnet, right? And we assigned to the domain controller 210. So let's just assign 211 to this. The subnet mask will once again be 255.255.0. And then the gateway would be the same as before, which is 230.2. Now here's something else that's very important. If you are connecting a workstation to a domain controller, that domain controller will de facto serve as your DNS server. So if you skip this part, this won't work. So for preferred DNS, change that to the IP address of the domain controller. And that's it. So we can just save. We can close that up. And now all that's really left to do is to actually join our domain controller, right? So hit the start button, hit settings, go to system, right at the bottom, go to about, and then here you can see advanced system settings. Click that. Here at the top, let's hit the first one called computer name. And here at the bottom, it says to rename this computer, change its domain, click change. So we'll hit change. The first thing I do want to actually give it another name. So I'm just going to call this station 1. And then we can see instead of being part of a work group, let's select a domain. And our domain, of course, is getgood.com or whatever you decided to call your forest, right? And we'll hit OK. And it's going to ask us now to log in because obviously we need to be a user on this domain in order to log in. So I'm actually going to log in as a domain admin. Let's log in as Sarah Connor. And that message basically tells us that we've succeeded, that we've successfully logged in. Right. All right, guys, so we had to restart once again. As you probably noticed now, when you install Active Directory, you basically have to restart almost at every single step. So once we get to the login, we don't want to log in with Castor Troy now. We want to log in into the GetGood domain, right? So once again, let's select Sarah Connor. right, and once again, you can see it kind of changed the scaling. So let's just right click display settings and change our scale right there to 300 again. Great. So that's it, guys. We're pretty much done. I'm going to go ahead and once again disable Defender, virus protection, as well as firewall, as well as kind of the timeout or sleep. The 3 last steps we also performed with the DC. They are the exact same here for Windows 11. So I'm not going to waste your time and show that to you again. But I recommend you go ahead and do that. And then that's pretty much it. We've set up this cool little, very simple and vulnerable Active Directory domain. And so now it's ready for us to go ahead and use and do all the awesome red teaming exercises that we'll go ahead and do in the future. And so I'm really looking forward to that. It's obviously going to be awesome. And until then,
Peace out.